You are cleaning yourself with your beak, plucking out loose feathers, making sure you have your mating ritual down packed, making sure you look the best for your flock. You fly into this gigantic arena. It's loud, but there are still beams you can hang out on. You notice this tiny black guy yelling at this other tiny white guy. The crowd of people are cheering, hoping for a scrap. You can't understand what they're saying because you're a bird. But in no time, a huge black man starts yelling and prepares to fight with the smaller black man. You are a pigeon, and the people fighting were Manel Kape and Israel Adesanya, and this is the Casual's Guide to Manel Kape versus Muhammad Mokaev. Manel Kape has been making waves in the MMA scene for a while now, and he is starting to run out of time to get that UFC flyweight belt. But before we break that down, we will go all the way to the beginning of his career. Manel was born in Luanda, Angola, and stands 5 feet and 6 inches tall, and fights at flyweight, and currently trains at AKA Thailand. Manel wasted zero time playing in the amateurs, so his first MMA fight was a professional MMA fight. The promotion he started with was Cage Fighters, and in 2012, Manel would go up against Artur Gomez and would get the knockout in the first round. And in his next fight with Renato Ferreira, he would get his fastest finish in his career. Just 45 seconds into the first round, he would knock out Renato. In his next matchup in Cage Fighters, he would square off with Ricardo Teixeira, and Manel would shine bright once again, sinking in a rear naked choke in the very first round, just 2 minutes in. And in his last fight with the Cage Fighters promotion, he would fight Marco Santos. Manel was 4-0 in his career this far. Unfortunately, the O has to go. And when he fought Suk Campasath, he lost by rear naked choke in the third round. But this didn't deter Manel from reaching his goals. A month later, Manel would be scheduled for another scrap with Hicham Rachid, and Manel would run right through him with a flying knee to the body in the very first round. Manel was confident but not delusional. He was in the lab working on his ground game, and he showed it in his next matchup with Daniel Barres. And Manel would sync up tied armbar and force the tap just 3 minutes into the first round. And in Manel's next 2 fights, he would submit both opponents, one with the classic rear naked choke, and Manel would get another armbar on his record. After proving his grappling is worlds apart from when he took his one and only loss, he would go back to showcase his striking. And when he would fight Francisco Martinez, he would show it by knocking his opponent out 4 minutes and 59 seconds into the last round. And after his buzzer beater knockout, Manel would fight Ersan Yamamoto, and he would get the spectacular head kick knockout just 1 minute into the very first round. Manel at this point was flying high with a record of 10 wins and 1 loss, and he would face his toughest opponent to date, a man that was razor close to beating the flyweight GOAT, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, and this opponent was Ian McCall. Manel would show up and show out in this matchup, getting the knockout over Ian McCall in less than 2 minutes into the first round. However, this would be the end of his epic win streak. When Manel would fight Koichi Haraguchi, he would get stuck in a triangle choke 4 minutes into the last round and take his second loss in his career. But the bad luck did not end there. Manel would be on the wrong end of a split decision against Kai Asakura after taking 2 losses in a row. For the first time in his career, he would get matched up with Yazaku Nakamura, and Manel would get back on track, syncing up a rear naked choke and forcing the tap in the last 30 seconds of the fight, and he would get set up for a scrap with Yuta Sasaki. This would be a tough fight for Manel, and he would end up losing again by decision, but in a much more dominating fashion. And in about half a year, Manel would be set up to fight Seichiro Ito and knock out Ito in the second round with a nasty body shot. After getting back in the win column, Manel would fight Takeya Mizukaki and finish him as well in the second round with a fresh punch to his chops. After finally getting the momentum back on his side, Manel would get a rematch with the man that beat him in the split decision. Kai Asakura, and Manel would knock out Kai in the second round, redeeming himself. And after this 3-fight win streak, the UFC would finally welcome Manel with open arms and push him into the deep end with now the current champion, Alexandre Pantoja. This fight was in 2021, and Manel would make his UFC debut, but Manel would unfortunately lose his fight by unanimous decision. But this couldn't be a tougher fight for a man making his UFC debut. So a few months later, Manel would fight Matheus Nicolau and lose a razor-close decision, that being a split decision. This would be the second time Manel would lose 2 in a row. Things were looking bleak and he doubted himself, especially in the big leagues. So the UFC gave him a more winnable matchup and a prospect that was being hyped up by the legend of the sport. Daniel Cormier was hyping this man up, and that prospect was Ode Osbourne. Manel would finally shine bright on the big stage, knocking out Ode in the very first round, and the fans were loving it. So Manel would fight a very hyped up Kazakhstan fighter, Zhalgas Zhumagulov, and Manel would get the clean knockout once again, beating Zhalgas in the first round. After these back-to-back fantastic performances, Manel would face a good fighter in David Dvorak, but this fight wasn't as flashy or as dominant, but Manel would still get the win, beating David by unanimous decision. In his most recent fight, Manel would scrap with Felipe Dos Santos, and Manel would win another decision. And this finally brings us to his fight with the biggest flyweight prospect, an undefeated fighter, Muhammad Mokaev. Before we move on to Mokaev's career, we must talk about Manel's wins and losses. Manel has 19 wins and 6 losses, 11 wins by knockout, 5 wins by decision, and 5 wins by submission, and 3 decision wins. 2 of those being in his last 2 fights. And he has lost 2 fights by submission and 4 decision losses. Manel may not be an undefeated fighter, but with the hype behind him, it's hard to overlook him. He has fantastic kickboxing and has lightning fast strikes. The big downside he has is he can be locked up in chokes and get too comfortable grappling and not defending, while at the same time trying to get back on the feet. Now it is finally time to look at Muhammad Mokaev. Muhammad Mokaev is 23 years old, which is very young, especially considering he is a win or 2 away from fighting for the belt. Unlike Manel Kape, Mokaev had an insane amateur career. Starting when he was just 15 years old in 2015, he had an amazing 23 wins and 0 losses in his amateur career alone. He started in 2015 at 15 years old and ended in 2020. And in August of 2020, Mokaev would make his long-awaited professional debut against Glenn McVeigh in Brave FC. And Mokaev would show everyone why he is extremely hyped up for a man only making his debut by beating Glenn in a very dominant unanimous decision, and he wasted 0 time in taking on his next opponent. And that next opponent was Hayden Sheriff. And this fight would not go like his last fight went. Mokaev landed a nasty body kick and rained ground and pound shots until a stoppage just 51 seconds into the very first round. He finally took a month off, and in October of 2020, Mokaev would take on his third opponent, Jamie Kelly, and Mokaev would lock up a nasty rear naked choke in the 3rd round, enforcing the tap. The next month, Mokaev would face Dave Jones and make short work of Jones by getting another knockout on his resume in just the 1st round. After going 4-0, Mokaev took a few months off to relax and would fight his next opponent in March of 2021. And that man was Abdul Hassan. And Mokaev would win another scrap in extremely dominating fashion in this fight and his next fight. His next fight would be the one and only blemish on his prestigious record. Mokaev would fight Bragim Navrazov and land an accidental shot to the sack, the family jewels if you will, and end up having it be a no contest on his record. After that blunder, he would take a few months off to hone in his craft, and his next fight would be with Blaine O'Driscoll, and Mokaev would force the tap in the second round just 1 minute in. The UFC at this point has heard a lot of this Muhammad fella, his amazing amateur career, his good pro career this far, so they gave a young 21-year-old Muhammad Mokaev a shot in the big leagues. And this is the first UFC fight, and in his first UFC fight would be against Cody Durden. Mokaev would shine brighter than ever before. He would get Cody out of there in just 58 seconds into the very first round. So they tested him against a fan favorite and a former Olympic wrestler, Charles Energy Johnson. And Mokaev, this would be a very fun scrap, testing the grappling of both men, but Mokaev would get the better of the exchanges and win by unanimous decision. After the extremely impressive win, Mokaev would fight a high-level black belt in jiu-jitsu, and that being Malcolm Gordon. Mokaev would prove to his fans and the promotion that he is as legit as they come by beating Gordon at his own game, syncing up a nasty armbar in just the last 30 seconds of the fight and forcing a tap out. His next fight would be against Jafil Fiho, and Mokaev would show up and show out once again by cranking the daylights out of Jafil's neck and making him go to the chiropractor's office. He did so in the last 30 seconds of the fight again. So the UFC, being tired of Mokaev beating the opponents with ease, so they made him fight an extremely tough veteran and Tim Elliott. But Mokaev was confident, he had a ton of momentum, and he was becoming undeniable. And Tim would not stop this hype train, because Mokaev would sync up a dirty arm triangle and force the tap once again just 3 minutes into the third round. In his most recent fight, Mokaev would fight an extremely experienced fighter and one of the toughest men in the division, and that man was none other than Alex Perez. Mokaev would prove to the fans and the promotion once again that he is undeniable, and he is a force to be reckoned with by outclassing the junkyard dog in Perez, beating him by unanimous decision. Mokaev may be 12-0 in the pros and 6-0 in the UFC, but he has already had 35 fights under his belt at just 23 years old. That's insane. At the same time, he is undefeated in the amateurs and the pros, with the only blemish being from that no contest. He currently has 2 knockout wins and 6 submission wins, with 4 decision wins under his belt. I think this goes without saying who I think will win this fight, but I'll explain further. Manel has missed weight 2 times in a row, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does this time as well. He has shown a lack of professionalism and has been very up and down in his career. Not to mention he has had a tough time with dominant grapplers, and I don't think he has faced an opponent like Mokaev. To be fair, I do want Kape to win, just because he is more entertaining, but I can't lie about who I think will win, and that is Mokaev. He has the youth on his side, as well as the momentum, and oddly enough, the experience. Who do you think will win, and how will they do it? I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you want to support the channel, hit like and subscribe. And as always, I hope you guys have a great week and enjoy the fights. Bye.